I thought my relationship was perfect until my boyfriend showed up to our anniversary dinner with his ex-girlfriend and casually asked me to cover the bill. So this happened 3 months ago and I'm still processing everything that went down. I've been dating this guy for about 2 years now, and honestly I thought we were heading towards something serious. We talked about moving in together, maybe getting a pet, all those couple Y things that make you feel like you're building a future with someone. We had planned this special dinner at this upscale Italian place downtown to celebrate our 2-year anniversary. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Even bought a new dress specifically for the occasion. The kind of dress that makes you feel confident and beautiful, you know? I spent extra time on my makeup, did my hair just right, and arrived at the restaurant feeling like I was glowing. I got there first and waited at our reserve table, checking my phone every few minutes. He was running about 15 minutes late, which wasn't unusual for him, so I wasn't too worried. The restaurant had this romantic ambience with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. I was sipping on water and mentally rehearsing how I wanted to bring up some future plans we'd been discussing. Then I saw him walking toward the table, and my heart did this little skip like it always did when I saw him. But as he got closer, I noticed someone walking behind him. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence, like maybe they happened to be walking in the same direction. But no, they were definitely together. My stomach dropped when I realized who it was. His ex-girlfriend from college. The one he dated for 3 years before we got together. The one whose photos I'd accidentally stumbled across on his laptop once, which led to a whole awkward conversation about his past relationships. She was exactly as I remembered from those photos, tall, blonde, with this effortless kind of beauty that made me suddenly feel overdressed and trying too hard. He approached our table with this sheepish grin, like he just pulled off some kind of surprise party. He bent down to kiss my cheek, completely casual, and then gestured to his ex like he was introducing a new coworker or something. He explained that they'd run into each other on the street just outside the restaurant, and since she was alone and hungry, he'd invited her to join us. Just like that. No asking me first, no checking if I was comfortable with it, nothing. I sat there for a moment, completely stunned, trying to process what was happening. This was supposed to be our special night, our anniversary celebration, and now his ex was pulling up a chair to our table like this was some casual group hangout. She seemed just as surprised as I was, but she went along with it, probably thinking it would be awkward to refuse. The whole dinner became this bizarre three-way conversation where I felt like a third wheel at my own anniversary dinner. They kept bringing up memories from their college days. Inside jokes I couldn't possibly understand. Stories about people I'd never met. I tried to participate, to steer the conversation toward topics we could all engage with, but it felt forced and uncomfortable. What made it worse was watching how they interacted. There was this easy familiarity between them, this comfortable rhythm they fell into like no time had passed at all. They laughed at each other's jokes, finished each other's sentences, and shared looks that made me feel invisible. I started wondering if I was seeing something that wasn't there, if I was being paranoid or jealous for no reason. But the worst part came when the check arrived. Without even glancing at it, my boyfriend slid it across the table to me and said something about how I was always better with numbers and money stuff, like it was just assumed that I would handle it. The total was over $200 for 3 people, including drinks and appetizers I hadn't even wanted to order. I stared at that check, feeling this mix of embarrassment, anger, and disbelief. Here I was, expected to pay for my boyfriend's impromptu reunion dinner with his ex, while they both looked at me expectantly. His ex at least had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable and offered to contribute, but my boyfriend just waved her off, saying it was fine, that I had it covered. I paid the bill because what else was I going to do? Make a scene in the middle of a nice restaurant? But I was fuming inside. The whole ride home was tense and quiet. When I finally brought up how inappropriate the whole situation had been, he got defensive. He said I was being dramatic, that they were just friends now, and that I should be secure enough in our relationship not to feel threatened by his past. That word threatened stuck with me, because I realized that's exactly how I felt, but not in the way he meant. I felt threatened by how easily he dismissed my feelings, how casually he'd changed our special plans without consulting me, how naturally he'd expected me to foot the bill for his nostalgia trip. Update 1 posted 2 weeks later. Thanks to everyone who responded to my original post. The comments really helped me see that I wasn't overreacting. A lot of you asked what happened after that dinner, so here's the update. The next few days after the anniversary disaster were really tense between us. He seemed to think that if he just acted normal, the whole thing would blow over. He'd text me good morning like usual, send me funny memes during the day, suggest we grab dinner or watch a movie. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. I kept replaying that evening in my head, analyzing every detail. The way he'd lit up when he saw her on the street. How quickly he'd made the decision to invite her without considering my feelings. The casual way he'd expected me to pay, like I was just there to bankroll whatever he wanted to do. It wasn't just about the money, though that stung. It was about what it represented, this assumption that my role was to accommodate whatever he decided, regardless of how it affected me. About a week after the dinner, something strange happened that made everything so much worse. I was at the grocery store just doing my normal weekend shopping, when I ran into his ex in the produce section. We made eye contact across the apples, and there was this awkward moment where we both clearly recognized each other, but weren't sure if we should acknowledge it. She ended up approaching me, which I definitely wasn't expecting. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her shopping basket and not quite making eye contact. She started by apologizing for the dinner, saying she'd felt really uncomfortable about the whole situation but hadn't known how to gracefully extract herself once it started. But then she said something that completely floored me. She told me that the meeting hadn't been as random as he'd made it seem. Apparently, they'd been texting back and forth for a few weeks leading up to that night. Not constantly or anything inappropriate, she was quick to clarify, but enough that when she mentioned she was going to be in that part of town that evening, he'd suggested they grab a quick coffee or something. She swore she had no idea it was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. She thought she was just meeting up with an old friend for a casual catch-up. When he suggested the restaurant instead of coffee, she'd assumed it was because he wanted somewhere nicer to chat. She only realized something was off when she saw me sitting there all dressed up, clearly expecting a romantic evening. The worst part was that she felt terrible about it. She kept apologizing, saying she never would have agreed to join if she'd known what the situation really was. She even offered to reach out to him to clear things up, to make sure he understood how inappropriate it had been. But I told her not to worry about it, that it wasn't her responsibility to manage his behavior. Walking to my car after that conversation, I felt this weird mix of validation and devastation. Validation because it confirmed that my instincts had been right, the whole thing had been planned at least partially. But devastation because it meant my boyfriend had actively deceived me about what happened. When I confronted him about it later that evening, his reaction was not what I expected. Instead of getting defensive like usual, he got really quiet. He sat on his couch for a long time, just staring at his hands, before finally admitting that yes, they'd been in touch and yes, he'd suggested meeting up that night. His explanation was that he'd been curious about how she was doing, that running into her digitally through mutual friends had stirred up some nostalgia, and he'd wanted to see her as a friend. He insisted it wasn't romantic, that he loved me and wanted to be with me. But he also admitted that he'd been comparing our relationship to theirs, wondering about different paths his life might have taken. That honesty was somehow worse than if he'd just lied, because it meant this wasn't just a thoughtless mistake, it was him actively choosing to prioritize his curiosity about his ex over our relationship. And doing it on our anniversary, no less. We had this long, exhausting conversation that went in circles for hours. He kept apologizing and promising it would never happen again, while I tried to figure out if I could trust him anymore. The whole foundation of our relationship felt shaky, like I was seeing him clearly for the first time and not liking what I saw. By the end of that night, we decided to take a break. Not a breakup exactly, but some space to figure out what we both really wanted. He would stay at his place, I'd stay at mine, and we'd try to sort through our feelings without the pressure of trying to make things work day by day. The break was supposed to last 2 weeks, but it's been a month now and honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back to how things were. Update 2 posted 1 month later. Well, the break turned into something much more complicated than either of us expected. Thanks again to everyone who's been following this saga. Your perspectives have been incredibly helpful, as I've tried to navigate all of this. During our month apart, I threw myself into other aspects of my life that I'd maybe been neglecting. I started taking these evening art classes I've been wanting to try for ages. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen much of while I was wrapped up in the relationship. I even went on a weekend trip with my sister to this little mountain town we'd always talked about visiting. It was during that trip that I realized how much of myself I'd been compromising without even noticing. My sister pointed out that I seemed more like my old self than I had in months. More spontaneous, more confident, more willing to speak up about what I wanted. She didn't push me to talk about the relationship stuff, but she did mention that she'd noticed I'd seemed kind of diminished lately, like I was always second-guessing myself. That observation hit me hard because it was true. I'd been so focused on making the relationship work, on being understanding and accommodating, that I'd stopped paying attention to whether it was actually working for me. The anniversary dinner disaster wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the most obvious example of a pattern I'd been ignoring. Meanwhile, my ex-boyfriend was apparently having his own revelations. About 3 weeks into our break, he started reaching out more frequently. Not pushy texts or anything, but thoughtful messages about things he was thinking through. He'd started seeing someone professionally to work through his feelings about commitment and relationships. He wrote me this long email about how the whole situation had forced him to confront some patterns in his behavior that he hadn't been aware of. According to him, he'd realized that he had this tendency to compartmentalize his relationships, to treat different people in his life like they served different purposes rather than seeing how his actions affected everyone involved. He said the anniversary dinner had been him trying to have his cake and eat it too, maintaining his connection with his ex while also keeping me in his life, without considering how unfair that was to both of us. His insights were actually pretty mature and self-aware, which made everything more complicated. Part of me was impressed that he was doing the work to understand himself better. But another part of me was frustrated that it had taken him hurting me so badly to get to this point of self-reflection. The real plot twist came about 6 weeks into our break. I was at my art class working on this painting of a sunset over water, when someone sat down at the easel next to mine. It was a guy I'd noticed in previous classes but never really talked to. He was always focused on his work, created these incredible detailed sketches that made my amateur paintings look like kindergarten art. We started chatting during the break, just casual conversation about techniques and favorite artists. He had this quiet, thoughtful way of talking that was really refreshing after all the emotional intensity I'd been dealing with. Over the next few classes, we fell into this easy friendship. He'd give me tips on shading, I'd share my snacks with him, we'd compare our terrible attempts at painting fruit bowls. There was nothing romantic about it at first. I was still technically on a break with my boyfriend and definitely not looking for anything complicated. But I found myself looking forward to Tuesdays, to those couple of hours where I could focus on something creative and have conversations that didn't require me to analyze every word for hidden meanings. One evening after class, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee and keep talking about this art exhibition we'd both been interested in seeing. It seemed innocent enough and I was enjoying his company, so I said yes. We ended up sitting in this little cafe for 3 hours, talking about everything from art to travel to our completely different career paths. It wasn't until I was driving home that I realized I just had the most relaxed, enjoyable evening I'd experienced in months. No walking on eggshells, no trying to read between the lines, no feeling like I had to be anyone other than exactly who I was. Just easy conversation with someone who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. This continued for a few weeks. We'd go to art class, sometimes grab coffee or dinner afterward, occasionally text about random things we thought the other would find interesting. I started to develop feelings for him, which scared me because I still hadn't officially ended things with my boyfriend. The situation came to a head when my boyfriend suggested we meet up to talk about getting back together. He'd been working on himself, he said, and felt ready to commit to making real changes in how he approached our relationship. He wanted to take me to dinner somewhere nice, just the two of us, to start fresh. Sitting across from him at that restaurant, listening to him outline all the ways he planned to be different, I realized that I wasn't the same person who had started this break 2 months ago. The time apart had shown me what it felt like to be with someone who didn't make me feel like I was constantly auditioning for the role of girlfriend. And while my boyfriend's growth was admirable, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being asked to forget about my own growth in service of giving our relationship another chance. Final update posted 3 weeks later. I've been avoiding writing this final update because it feels like closing a chapter on a part of my life that was really significant, even if it didn't end the way I originally hoped it would. After that dinner where my ex-boyfriend laid out his plan for how we could make things work, I asked for a few more days to think everything through. I spent a lot of time walking around my neighborhood, journaling, and talking through my feelings with my sister and a few close friends. Everyone was supportive of whatever decision I made, but they also helped me see some things I'd been avoiding. The biggest realization was that even though my ex-boyfriend was clearly making an effort to change, I had changed too. The person I'd become during our time apart wasn't someone who wanted to go back to that relationship, even an improved version of it. I'd gotten used to not having to justify my reactions or convince anyone that my feelings were valid. I'd remembered what it felt like to be excited about someone's company, rather than anxious about their moods. I met with my ex-boyfriend one more time to officially end things. It was sad but not devastating, which told me everything I needed to know about whether we belonged together. He took it better than I expected, admitted that he'd suspected I was pulling away, and even said he was proud of me for prioritizing what I actually wanted rather than just trying to make things work for the sake of it. He asked if there was someone else, and I was honest about developing feelings for someone but explained that wasn't why I was ending things. I was ending things because I'd realized I deserved to be someone's first choice, not their fallback plan after they'd explored other options. As for the guy from art class, well, that's been its own journey. After my ex-boyfriend and I officially broke up, I told my art class friend about the situation. I was nervous about how he'd react, worried that he might feel like he'd been unknowingly involved in some kind of love triangle drama. His response was so perfectly him, thoughtful and patient and completely understanding. He said he'd suspected I was working through something complicated, and had just enjoyed getting to know me without any pressure or expectations. He was willing to take things slow and see where they developed naturally. We've been officially dating for about a month now, and it's been such a different experience from what I was used to. There's no drama, no second-guessing, no feeling like I have to perform or prove myself worthy of his attention. He treats me like someone whose thoughts and feelings matter by default, not something I have to earn. Last week, he took me to that art exhibition we talked about on our first coffee date. Walking through the gallery with him, listening to his insights about different pieces, sharing my own interpretations without worrying about whether they sounded smart enough. It struck me how much my standards for relationships had changed. I used to think love was supposed to be hard work, that the drama and uncertainty meant the relationship was passionate and important. Now I'm learning that real compatibility feels more like peace than chaos. It's not boring or passionless. It's just secure in a way that allows both people to be their full selves without fear. Looking back on the whole anniversary dinner situation that started this entire mess, I can almost feel grateful for it. If my ex-boyfriend hadn't shown his true colors so clearly that night, I might have spent years trying to convince myself that his behavior was acceptable. I might have continued shrinking myself to fit into a relationship that was never going to make me truly happy. The money I spent on that dinner ended up being the best investment I never meant to make. It bought me clarity about what I wouldn't tolerate and ultimately led me to someone who would never dream of putting me in that position in the first place. My new guy and I went to that same Italian restaurant a few weeks ago, and it felt like reclaiming something. We split the bill without even discussing it, talked about our shared interests and future plans, and I left feeling energized rather than drained. It was everything an anniversary dinner should be, even though we were just 2 months into dating. I still have moments where I wonder what might have happened if I tried harder to make things work with my ex, if I'd been more patient with his growth process. But those moments pass quickly because I know in my heart that some things can't be fixed with effort alone. Sometimes people just aren't right for each other. And that's not anyone's fault. To anyone who's read this whole saga and recognizes themselves in any part of it, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you that your standards are too high, or that you're being too sensitive. You deserve to be with someone who chooses you clearly and consistently, someone who doesn't make you question your worth or compete for their attention. And sometimes the best thing that can happen is for someone to show you exactly who they are, even if it's painful in the moment. Because once you know, you can decide whether that's someone you want to build a life with, or someone you need to let go of to make space for something better. 3 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was a disastrous anniversary dinner. Now I realize it was actually the beginning of the best decision I've made in years.